sound. And today we are not sponsored by Henry Weinhard's Orange Cream Soda. I'm trying to put this in there so it doesn't get this stuff. I drink this non-alcoholic. It doesn't have caffeine for our LDS audience out there. But yeah, no, some tasty stuff. Now, where did I find this? I was in the grocery stores down here called Brookshire's, and it just happened to be over there by the frozen foods. So, some tasty stuff, man. So that's who we're not. That's who we're not sponsored by.
We're not sponsored by them, but if they want to sponsor us, if they feel like sponsoring us, then by God, we'll hold that bottle up any chance.
That's exactly right. I'll put those bottles behind me instead of these from the 19th century. So anyway,
what's going on, Chris? I mean, other than your orange soda, man. What's going on?
Just doing things, man. I mean, working the work, doing a bunch, working some cases, doing some risk assessments, all that busy work stuff that people need done today.
Yeah, I think that's what kind of helped prompt what we're going to talk about today, because obviously Chris is doing that for big, for enterprises and companies and that sort of deal. But we saw a story come across the wire that's not really being talked about that much, which is what we watch for, right? Are things that we think are actually much bigger than the thought leaders and the press are giving them time to talk about. So we're going to be talking about the ability for people to kind of impersonate you from a network perspective. Along the same lines of people stealing your credit card numbers by scanning them at a gas pump or something like that and pretending they're you. In order to get away with that nowadays, because the payment companies and banks are getting smarter about it, they're doing things that are they've adopted this tactic of using
kind of like stealing
things on your network.
Yeah, kind of. I don't know what you'd call it. Kind of like stealing your residential digital identity.
Yeah. So not you as a human identity, but your residence's identity, because that's part of what a bank or a financial institution wants to verify, is that you are the person you say you are, living where you say you are. That's all telemetry it uses to do that. And I just telling Chris before we started this, and I don't know how many relatives I got. In fact, I'm embarrassed to count how many there are. But when I go into their house,
and they're all double cousins.
Yeah, they're our family tree's got limited forks. Let's just say that.
Everybody looks the same. Anyway.
Yeah. But when I go into their houses, one things I see them doing all the time is they've got these new little TV boxes, right, that you can get you pay one time for $35 and you can stream anything that's ever been put out in the history of man. And they're good Christian folks, but they know that can't possibly pay for the content that they're watching, right? So they've got these boxes because we bought this and nobody said it was illegal. And there's some things you don't have to. But the bigger thing they don't realize, and this is where we got on this conversation, is they don't realize that
when you go buy drugs, it's not like the drug dealer goes, "Hey, before you buy this, I want to inform you that this is illegal."
Yeah, you need to be aware that this might be against the law. That's not the conversation. But what are my relatives doing? They're adding these smart boxes and smart TVs to their network without even thinking about it. I mean, we have it in a long time, right? If you buy a smart TV, everybody's got a smart TV, but they don't think about the fact those things can be usurped now. So that's kind of what we're talking about today. It's an impersonation of you, but not you as a human, you as your location and things, to enhance their ability to try and.
It's kind of a new spin on a money mule. So I come from the banking world, and we used to have that where somebody would get talked into being the middleman on a transaction that was a criminal transaction, but they were going to make a cut off of it. And so they're kind of somewhat the innocent bystander in the fact that they're doing this, and they're called the money mule. And instead of this being a human money mule, it's your residential digital footprints, the money mule.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's, with all of there's millions of smart TVs out there, right, and streaming boxes, and all of a sudden, every one of them is given the bad guys the ability to have an alibi about why what they're doing is legitimate, because they're impersonating you from a digital standpoint so well that they're fooling. They have gotten around some controls, right? Because, and like Chris said, he's been in banking before, so you depend a lot on things like geofencing and what your IP address is when the request comes in, and where, does that geolocate to where you live, that's in their telemetry about who you are as a human being, when you have an account. So this is a stepping up or a leveling up of them using these proxies. These are basically proxies inside of your house to kind of pull that off. That's what's
Yeah. I mean, we were talking about before. I mean, people have lots of bandwidth now too, so
yeah.
they can do these things pretty much undetected to the layperson, and they don't need a lot of bandwidth to carry out what they're trying to do. So it's not like they're sucking gigabytes of data from your home network. That's not what they're doing. They're just leveraging a little bit of compute power and your identity, your IP address, to make sure that whoever they're trying to use a fraudulent credit card says, "Oh yeah, that looks like a legit residence. Yeah, that looks good. We're gonna let it go through."
That's really what it's come down to, right? I mean, it's an impersonation, but it's a more complete picture. It's not only you as all the data they got on you as a person, but now they've got the location. They're coming from your neighborhood. They don't have to be at your house in your house. They can be in the neighbor's house next to you, and the telemetry is going to be roughly the same. That these are the people who live in Austin, Texas, and guess what? This one does too. So they're from Austin. Yeah, so that means that's okay. They can take all of their retirement funds out because they say who they are and they're from Austin, Texas, because we've checked that. Geolocated their IP address, and yeah, it'd be different if you were trying to take out all of your retirement savings and you lived in Korea. Different story. If you didn't live in Korea to begin with, but all of a sudden you try to do it from Korea, then there's plenty of dealing with that. But that's what these guys are doing now. They're building a much more complete impersonation of you, not just with your data points, but now your infrastructure. They're using your or infrastructure near you to impersonate you. So that's really what it comes down to. I know nobody watching this has those really cheap cable box.
Yeah, I'm sure. Or you don't know anybody who does because you don't associate with those kind of people. But
yeah, those kind of criminals.
But they get So to give a little bit of credit, I mean, there's this article that we leveraged for this that was from the site Bleeping Computer. If you're a tech dude, or dudette, you know what Bleeping Computer is, and it was sponsored by a company called Flare, which has a platform that does this. It's a cybersecurity platform, provides a lot of threat intel. I've used it. It's a great platform. So no.
Yeah, that's one thing to keep in mind is that this particular article that we use as the core, at least the lead article to dig into this, Flare was responsible for the creation of that. So I mean. But
and it was not as much as like this was sponsored by. I mean, they did the work. Yeah, they did.
They actually did the work of the research. Yes, but I mean, so the reason Chris and I use the method we use, because you know what we do. If you're not familiar with us, then what we do is we take that URL and then we run a sophisticated analysis query or prompt against all the LLM. We use 5 different LLMs as part of the process, right? So we put that in there. They generate an analysis report. We grab all of those analysis reports. We feed that back into another model and let it do an executive summary across all of the findings across all of the LLMs. And it's designed to pull the validated, verified information from each one of them to where they're actually reinforcing each other's perspective on that. And it creates what's eventually the executive summary that's available online. So the other thing that we do is we put the individual reports in a folder. We also put the executive summary in the folder. It'll all be in the links below. If you go to this article, once we do this discussion, there'll be an article about it on LinkedIn, along with a link to this video. And there you can find the link to just click and go download the files if you want to really take a look hardcore at the data that got pulled together so you can see what we're talking about. We put all that out there. So we're 100% transparent. Whatever we get that generates our notes for talking about in the show is the same material that you're going to see. There's nothing that we're using that you're not going to be able to dig into, because the idea is just to make it easier for you guys to investigate this and take a look at it and draw your own conclusions. I mean, not just what Chris and I think, for sure. Yeah. So that's how we do it. And that's the way we try to skip this bias. We try to eliminate a lot of bias out of these things because our prompt tells them, hey, go find other articles that are reference the same thing and correlate those. And give me the sources. That's the other thing. The sources are documented in those reports about where they pulled the information from. And in some cases, some LLMs are just not that great at a query at some point, and the executive summary points that out. It says, well, out of the 5 LLMs, here's what this one did, here's what that one did. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. But the bottom line is this is actually real, and this is happening on a more frequent basis. And because of the ability of AI to be able to kind of build these build this profile up in a quick, short amount of time, it's just becoming more prevalent. And it's just going to be another thing that we have to be concerned about. And there'll be some findings at the end we'll talk about. to that. Bottom line being, there's no such thing now as a clean IP address anymore, right? Because of the ability for people to kind of usurp IP addresses. So, and everybody uses, and Chris, you could talk about this with the bank, right? I mean, a lot of these things from a session standpoint, they're what we call reputation scores for, the inbound session from a particular agent, either a web browser or a dedicated application. So when those come in, they're scored based on a bunch of rules, and it kind of generates a reputation score. I don't know how much you guys use that in the banking industry, but I mean, it's pretty standard operating procedure to say, well, if our algorithm says this has got a really low reputation, which means it's more suspect to not be real, what would affect that reputation score? Well, geofencing, usage patterns. If this is like 3 a.m. in the morning, that would adversely impact the reputation score for that session.
If it's reported on some kind of list already or in some kind of range, or, I think in this particular situation, they started looking at, I think these financial institutions and such started just looking at IP ranges that didn't belong to people, and go, well, and then they just wiped out or blocked out entire ranges of IPs just because they said, like, those IPs they should be never doing they should never do a credit card transaction or whatever, so we're just going to block them all out. I go a little bit on a tangent on this because I got in a conversation with somebody about this the other day about banks and fraud detection. And what I have heard is that AI is helping them do a much better job. But I still am very critical of how good, especially they're doing it when it comes to business email compromises. Because when I talk to people who've had money taken out through a wire or whatever, and you hear like, hey, this happened at this time of day for this amount to this bank that we've never wired from, you're like, how many red flags can you have before the bank goes, something's not right?
Right.
And then a lot of times what happens is the banks wash their hands because they have their agreements in place, and then especially these are with commercial customers, so the commercial agreements are longer and just way more verbose with a lot more terms and conditions on it than your typical depositor's agreement. Yeah, so so I'm happy to see this move, the needle move, but I think it should have moved a long time ago, and I think AI is just an excuse now. But I mean, for much of this stuff that they're doing, it's not rocket science, but I'm glad they're doing it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. So what we're seeing is and again, since AI has been involved in helping facilitate these bad guys, just like it is defenders, by the way. I'm not saying that AI doesn't help defenders, like Chris was just saying, it helps defenders, but we're in this cycle now. We're in the cycle of, okay, the takedowns of the bad guys and the tradecraft of the bad guys are kind of on two sides of the battle lines, and this is just going back and forth. Defenders the way you get people to not steal from you is make it really hard for them to pull it off. I mean, that's really the only defense, is to make it damn difficult to do, right? So that's what a defender does. They try to raise the cost of pulling this off to the point that the criminals are going to seek a much easier target. Everybody's heard that your whole life. This is just lock your car doors, because there are lots of people who don't lock their car doors. And there's probably some within proximity of yours. As long as your doors are locked, then they'll go take the easy target. It's the same thing on this front, same exact application on this front. Is, look, bottom line is, if the defenders can make it more difficult, then the criminals are going to move on to something that's a little easier.
Something easier,
but then, but now the criminals are also working harder to overcome that, because they've realized that, okay, we really need to figure out this infrastructure problem, because everybody's starting to geofence, and these reputation scores are adversely impacting their ability to steal shit. Well, that reputation score, like I said, is dependent on location in a lot of cases. That's what has got them working so hard to use this infrastructure more actively, which is just this is just a natural escalation of how
these devices are perfect, right? Because I mean, people aren't paying attention. I mean, how many times you're going to get like a 0-day vulnerability notification on your Samsung TV or your whatever device. We were talking again before this, and people know these devices have been around a lot. These very small computing devices called Raspberry Pis. And really, when they came out, they were kind of a hobbyist deal, if you want to call it that. People were finding out unique ways of doing it, and then soon people were creating tools. But now you actually see industrial and commercial purposes
right?
Out of a small computing device that's about this size. Now think about what's in your TV or in a smart refrigerator, washer, dryer, or all these other things. There's some horsepower there, and these guys don't need a lot to do what they need to do. And so, I mean, you're basically living in a kind of a mini data center. The more of these devices you have in your network, and it's infrastructure as a service for them for free.
Yeah. Yeah. To your point, I just bought a power strip this week, and it's a Wi-Fi enabled power strip so that I can turn sockets on and off from anywhere, And for
And so
me,
can the Chinese
it's
can
just
do
so
that
can the
too.
bad guys too if they could get to it. So I hooked all of my studio lights up to it so that I didn't have to go from light to light to light to light to light to turn on them. So now I can just get my phone, hit one button, and all the studio lights come up at once, right? But I just put a device in my house that is a network listening device that has some processing power so that it can do what it's doing. So, I mean, I've brought a risk into the house. Now, do I feel relatively confident that I can block people from taking advantage of that from outside of the network? Yeah, but hell, I'm an engineer. So, I mean, I know what to look for and I can set up for. But normal people like my relatives have no idea, what to look for. So again, you just got to ask some serious questions. I will tell you this, the recommendation from the FBI is to take all those devices out of your damn house because they're just not helping the situation. So they
For
err on the side of extreme, right?
Yeah, for full disclosure, Bob hosts a swingers night once a month, and he has a different light patterns for swingers night than he does for this.
Yeah.
Don't let him just
We,
tell you it's just for
we,
turning off and on. He's got
we got
he's
them.
got different profiles for different
We,
uses.
yeah, the one named Pineapple Parade is the one you got to watch out for. The other
But
ones are relatively innocent.
but if you haven't picked up on it, the swingers nights for some reason everybody that attends are related. So
It just
so
makes it a lot easier
it,
for the
it
for the
does.
play
It does.
settings. You
Yeah,
know who people are.
exactly. You do. They know
So
they
that
have their assigned seats.
they do have a science cushion is formed directly to their ass. You know what
That's
I mean? They know
exactly right.
exactly where to sit. So the attack chain. Let's talk about a little bit about the attack chain and how this goes down, right? So bad guys they acquire credit card data, and then they'll pick a particular bank as a
Mm.
target. You know what I mean, or a merchant as a target, and then they're going to vet it, right? They're going to try and figure out if they can find a proxy to be able to look into it. Like check the fraud scores for the card. This is normal procedure for them. They'll check to make sure there's fraud scores are not a big deal. Like Chris was saying, it hasn't been entered into what's quote called the dirty pool. That number could be in what's called the dirty pool, which affects the reputational score. And sometimes note that the scores conflict and can change really fast because it's kind of a real time
Yeah.
process. And then where we're talking about is the geo consistency. That is, are these requests coming from an IP address that is consistent with what we think the user's location typically is, right? That's the pattern. That's the behavioral data that we're
And
looking
in general location, like zip code or whatever,
at. Yeah.
they're not like trying to pinpoint it specifically to your house, but they just care about something in that area. So as long as you're in that geographic area, then that passes one of their tests.
Yeah. Yeah.
So your neighbor, they could be using your infrastructure to do something fraudulent with your neighbor's card because that's looking for.
Right. And then they're either going to utilize a headless browser or your browser if they can get at it, or a browser on the smart device, because they're looking to be able to use something out of that infrastructure to be able to actually
Yeah.
make the conversation work with whoever the merchant is or whoever the bank is. So, they need for the profile of them as a criminal that they're adding to this, it needs to match the telemetry of the user as much as possible in the location they're at. Because if you can have it perfect, but if there's any consistency whatsoever, that's one thing banks are very good at is they'll spot that inconsistency and just shut it down, right? They know how to do that. So, and then, a lot of providers are always blocking anything from processing companies and banks. Those people put really serious blocks in to try and cover this. So now you got marketplaces for bank compatible IP addresses. In other words, this is something that happens all the time in cybersecurity. You have what's called an access broker, right? That goes and figures out if this is all functional, working correctly, set up exactly right, so that a criminal could then use it to try to exploit the situation. There are people who just do that. They're just,
Kind
they're
of like
access vendors.
consumer reports.
Yeah.
To tell
Yeah.
you that's really going to work or not.
Yep. And so that's what they do, right? So they put, once they figure out they've got a justify or a legitimate access point that matches, the information related to the person who lives there, that sort of deal. They sell it, right? And then the bad guys come in, use that, and try to run the game. That's typically how this goes. So that's sort of the attack chain. That's how that attack chain functions. There's a lot of MITRE. This has, if you're into the MITRE attack frameworks, that sort of deal, look into the research in the executive report. You can look at that yourself. There's plenty there to read up on related to it. But I mean, it has to do with multi-hop proxying and that sort of deal. That's going to be the part of MITRE where it kind of sits. So again, we've got the reference material. Go take a look at that. We don't want to bore
Yeah, I
everybody
mean,
with that piece of it.
getting into MITRE would get us stuck in
Just,
mud.
yeah, no, nobody would. Yeah,
It's,
the four people that watch us would just stop.
yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so go look that up though. If you're an investigator
911
and you want to
rescue.
know, yeah, right. If you want to go look at it and look at the MITRE attack, the profiles thing, please, by all means, it's there. So there are a couple IOCs worth calling out related to this. So there's been the FBI has actually seized several domain names that are related to this.
Great name.
Yeah, netnut.com. Yeah, NETNUT.
I was wondering why I couldn't get that domain. That's because somebody else had it.
Yes, all the good ones are taken. So netnut.com, netnut.io, and then there's another one called Alarum, ALARUM.io. Those have all been associated with this process. So they've been seized by the
Feds,
government.
but feds, yeah.
Yeah, they got them now in their name servers so that
People
it's
ask
easy to
that real
figure out.
quick. Just kind of, always people ask about what the FBI does or whatever. This is primarily what they do is they take down the infrastructure, and typically they will put something in its place. So if somebody uses the infrastructure, they'll say, hey, this has been seized by, and they'll have the logos of whatever law enforcement agencies were involved in that. And then they also obviously are gathering evidence to try to apprehend and put somebody in jail for it. But the main thing is them setting down this infrastructure. And some people will argue, well, that's kind of a short-term effect. These guys will just spin something up. It's a bigger impact than that. It does set some people back. And I think the FBI, it seems like they're getting better at it.
Yeah, yeah, they are. They're learning as we go. So now, if you want, we'll talk about the LLMs. By the way, again, the summary of this is in that executive summary in the directory. So when you pull it, you'll see the same thing. But at least from the LLM perspective, all of them agreed that this is a trend. It's not really a breach per se, because in reality, they're living off the land. We've talked about that a lot lately. This is another living off the land sort of a thing. So they all agreed on that's what this is, and it is all about it's about the need to stop automatically trusting residential IP addresses. That's what the main message is that for merchants and banks, they're going to have to tighten up how they accept an inbound session from standard people, because you can't trust that anymore. You're not going to be able to trust that residential IP.
Well, and it's a tough one too, man. I mean, what if you are
Yeah.
like blacklisted, then you can't buy stuff from you? I mean, that kind of sucks. So
Yeah. It's going to be a mess, by the way. This is just going to get to be more and more of a mess, right? So Claude did pretty good. It was the primary source. It was what pulled in a lot of material, called out the sponsor content bias. So it's got a really good sourcing. It does a really good job at sourcing things. GPT. So by the way, the Claude was 4.8, just so you know which model we were in. I wasn't, well, no, I think actually, let me go look. No, I was using Fable. So Fable 5 did the Claude analysis, and 5.6 on GPT was the new model for it, and I used it. And that one it was actually the most verbose report came out. It's huge. It's got a lot of data in it. It's got a lot of sources, a lot of narrative around the MITRE attacks and the confidence levels for each of those. So it's really long though. So that ain't a summary reporting. What I would do is I'd take that one and I'd load it into an LLM and start asking it questions, so I didn't have to read the whole damn thing, because it has got a lot in it, right? To be Perplexity, once again, we've had a couple situations where Perplexity in this situation, and this one was just a big fail. It only cited one particular URL, and it was just weak on its ability to pull references. And I noticed when I put the query into it, it says I can't actually go read that article. I'm going, how can you not have access to read an article that's on the internet? Everybody else could do it. All the other LMs could do it. So I had to go cut the material out and paste it into Perplexity and let it see the content of the actual article. Grok was pretty decent. Added a couple of different contexts there, but it did invent a domain. So we've talked about
this. Is interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So it invented a domain.
This is where you do not want creativity.
No. And it's interesting because the prompt that we put in there very clearly says this needs to be an actual verifiable source. And even with that prompt in there, it's still, even with that element of the prompt in there, it's still fabricated something. So a good lessons to all of us that you got to trust but verify. Gemini did it actually named the antidetect browser tools and drew some nice. It actually did a pretty good diagram. Yeah, so it was pretty good. It was thinner.
Gemini is really good at that stuff.
Sure. It didn't do as many sources. It didn't find as many sources, so it didn't do as exhaustive a search. But the ones it did get, it used effectively. So that's the main thing. So who's this affect? Chris, if you want to talk about who this affects.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about it, just to, go over it. It's the banks, the merchants, the processors, the e-commerce, households with any kind of devices online, especially consumer devices are going to be more suspect than those companies that use these types of rules are going to have to continue to nurture them and understand how they work, how they don't work. Are they actually doing, I guess, false positives in a way where they're blocking good transactions and so on and so forth. I think as a consumer, you just need to understand that there's risk when you're buying this stuff. It doesn't matter whether it's a name brand or some obscure thing. They're probably going to have vulnerabilities, and I guarantee you they're not addressing them quickly, and they're not disclosing consistently like we see in the business world. It's going to be, chargebacks are going to happen, if these things aren't stopped. But, chargebacks are just evil anyway. I mean, I watched a video the other day where this person was going into a restaurant, and she was a seafood restaurant. She's ordering food, and it was like the third time or fourth time she'd been there. And the previous times after she had left, she had disputed the charge. So she was basically in there for free. So they figured out who she was, and they kicked her butt out of there. But anyway, you have this. Yeah, it's interesting. You talked about the Alarum. There's a public company. They lost 67% of its value in a week after that thing was seized.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't even think they were aware of what was going on necessarily, but it didn't matter. It didn't matter. They got impersonated as a part of the process. So, I mean, that's exactly right. Yeah. Think about that. Losing 67% of your company value on something that you weren't paying attention to, right? Because you didn't have, you didn't realize that someone had usurped a domain that looked like a legitimate domain, and then we're using it for that. Yeah, that's brutal.
And you have on here about MSPs and MSSPs about IP block list. I mean, those become. I mean, they're still necessary, but they become less effective because they're just leveraging legitimate IPs that you don't have blocked to carry out some stuff. So you need to be aware of that. We always talked about that with geofencing. Geofence only allow people to have one of those, like one of my news sites for San Antonio. They have geofencing on their site. I'm like, this is stupid. Because when I've been over in London, I tried to look at the local news. It blocks it. I'm like, this is stupid. But anyway, because it's these guys are just like in this case, they're going to find a useful IP address in a local area, and they're going to be able to do it. So just it's not saying those things are wrong or obsolete, but they're not as effective as they were back in the day.
Well, I mean, you got to treat this IP, a residential IP, as a context variable, proof of legitimacy. It used to be proof of legitimacy, and that we're past that time now. And by the way, I mean, if you're in another country and you've got a VPN client and you go and, target the endpoint of your VPN to be inside of a country, you can defeat geofences pretty straightforward for legitimate traffic. Now, illegitimate traffic, not so much, because they're watching, again, they're doing reputational information to determine whether or not they should let you use the VPN to begin with. But that's what these damn boxes in your residential houses are about, right? They're not using their traditional VPN server to beat the IP deal. They're using these boxes and using them as a jump box locally to defeat it, right? So that's all they're doing. It's not magic. They just are getting into a smart TV or a cable or a television streaming box, and taking advantage of it. And I'm talking about those cheap ones that are $35 that you can watch everything on. There is a reason why they're $35 and they let you watch everything on them, is because you're going to put it in there and you're going to watch everything on them, not giving a shit about the fact that you now just added a computer that doesn't belong to you onto your network.
You put not an intrusion detection device or intrusion prevention. No. You put an intrusion acceptance device in your network.
Yeah. You put an intruder in your network.
Yeah, you did. Yeah.
It's 100% intruder. So that's another, that's a big part of it. Detecting the card, testing, rate limiting by account, you know what I mean? To make sure that you're not getting like a ton of transactions from a particular place at a weird hour. Behavioral. There's a lot of behavioral. So, and the recommendation is rip out those no-name TV boxes. If you don't know where it came from and you don't know what the reputation of the company is at manufacturing, and you haven't done that homework, then take the damn thing out of your house until you figure that out. Maybe you got to pay $50 for the box, but it's somebody that's actually got a location in the universe that you can go find. That's a smarter play. So
that's right.
That's all it is. There we go.
There we go. That's the report for today.
Yep. Keep an eye on those. Nothing's for free. I don't know how else to say that. Nothing is for free.
$35 today is free.
Yeah. If it seems too cheap, $35 one time, not a month, one time. If it looks too good to be true, that's the old saying. It is. So stop doing that. Stop doing that crazy shit. That's all right. We got to say. Well, all right. We'll see you guys next time. Thanks for stopping by, and go check out the research, and there'll be an article on LinkedIn. This will be posted on YouTube. You'll see it from there. So see you guys next time.